privilege to introduce my next speaker. Gosh, I've known Senator Brogdon. When did you join OPAC?
Probably
9 years ago. Described by Charlie Meadows often as the conscience, moral conscience of the Oklahoma State Senate. He is actually known nationwide due to his appearances on several primetime or different nationwide broadcast radio and occasionally TV. He's a businessman from near Tulsa. He was in business for 30 years, and as many of us, we became very alarmed with what was going on in our nation, and so he decided to do something about it, and he became mayor of Owasso, wasn't it, at that time? About 2000 and when? 2000. And then he wanted to do something more about it, so he decided to run for the Oklahoma State Senate in 2002, and we are glad he did. Randy ran for governor in this state, and he got about double what the polls showed he might get, but he came up 4% shy of a runoff for the gubernatorial election here in the state of Oklahoma. He's recently this year founded Freedom's Role Institute, a nonprofit, and he's working on educating the voters of Oklahoma regarding, 11 questions on the state ballot, rather confusing, so he's using his time to do that. His hobbies including running, golfing, and such as that, but he's really in the freedom fight. Welcome our dear friend, Senator Randy Brogdon.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very warm welcome. Clark, thank you for the introduction. I want to introduce my most favorite person in the entire world. She is with me today. I'd like to introduce you to my high school sweetheart and my bride of 38 years. Donna, would you please stand? I found her when we were both young. I fell in love when I was a senior in high school, and I think 3 years later, or 2 years later after that, after 1 year of my college, we got married. We started a family shortly after that. We have successfully raised 2 little boys, which were about 20 months apart, into 2 fine young men. I have 1 daughter-in-law, and I'm a wannabe grandpa, and I don't have any of those yet, but I have truly been blessed with my family. Clark talked about that in just a moment, how important families are, and for those of you that have a stable family environment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My dad, I spent 17 years in business with my dad. I got a great story, which is not part of my notes here, but since he wanted us to talk a little bit about my family, I can't talk about my family without mentioning my dad, my best friend, my mentor, my business partner, until he suddenly passed away in 1989. But when I was a senior in high school, I loaned my dad $500 and my 1963 Chevy so Dad could fulfill his version of this great American dream. And he started our family business. And after I went off to college and got trained in the air conditioning business, I came back, and for 17 years, Dad and I worked side by side building that business together. And it was because of those strong family ties, the work ethic, all of the things that my family has poured into my life. I've been able to do that to my sons, and hopefully we will have opportunities to get back to what I call getting back to the basics, the very things that have made this country great. And I'm going to be talking about a few of those things today, but I'm excited about this opportunity to be with you today. And I appreciate you being here as well. I know you are from all over the country. So welcome to Oklahoma. I'm going to give a little bit different speech today than you might normally hear sometimes at some of these events. And Jack, where'd Jack go? He was in here a while ago. But the last time I gave a speech and Jack was there and Art was there, and I said, I kind of feel like the old jockey who took the old farmer who took his donkey to the Kentucky Derby, and he was lined up in the chute with all those thoroughbreds, and and all the jockeys were making fun of him. Said, "What are you doing here? You don't even have a chance of winning." You know, I'm sharing the stage with some pretty heavyweights today that you're going to hear some outstanding things in this seminar throughout the day and this evening. And so as the jockeys made fun of this old farmer sitting on his donkey, he said, "Well, I don't really expect to win. I just thought the association would do us both some good." And so that's kind of the way that I feel today. I entitled my speech, and I've already met a couple of you that may have heard this speech because I gave it down in Fort Worth just about 3 weeks ago. It was the first time I gave this particular speech. Now, my jokes are old, so but I do the same jokes all the time. But this speech is different. Now, I entitled it Crossing the Delaware. And back in 1776, on December the 23rd, the Battle of Trenton was fought. And General George Washington was trying to rally his troops, and they were getting ready to cross the Delaware and fight the Battle of Trenton. Now, Washington had already lost 5 previous battles, and his troops were demoralized. They were ill-equipped to fight another battle. A lot of his soldiers didn't have shoes. They didn't have enough ammunition. They had lost, and they just had this defeatist attitude. Washington was also faced with the reality that 6,000 of his soldiers were getting ready to rotate out of service. But he wasn't only having to fight the British at this time, he was having to fight Congress because he could not get the proper supplies for his soldiers. And on December the 23rd, after losing those 5 battles and thousands of men left on the battlefield, what was left of General Washington's ragged army that night stood in formation. He called them to attention on a cold, bitter winter night to hear a message from Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine said this to those soldiers. He said, "The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot," in other words, the part-timers, those who are not really invested, those who are not willing to go the extra mile, he said, they will shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands now deserves the honor and the love of man and women. The soldiers that night, cold, hungry, discouraged, homesick, they got a new revelation that night of what their mission was. You see, their mission was freedom. That's what they were fighting for. And 2 nights later on Christmas, they crossed the Delaware. And they engaged the enemy one more time, not necessarily knowing what the outcome of that battle would be, because the outcome had not been good in the 5 previous battles that they fought. The weather was so cold that night they crossed, they actually lost 2 of the soldiers. They froze to death crossing. Nonetheless, that night the Battle of Trenton was fought, and it proved to be a turning point in the Revolutionary War. Washington's army captured over 1,000 Haitian soldiers that night. They were allies of the British, and they did it without one single American soldier being lost. But you know what? That night before they crossed the Delaware, that defeated army, they had every reason to shrink back from the service and the call of their country. They had every reason to give up because they had been defeated time and time again. But evidently Thomas Paine's words inspired those soldiers. And I'm afraid too often in today's world, when things get tough, and when the odds of success seem just out of reach, and we're not going to be able to get there, we can't accomplish what we want to accomplish, I'm afraid it's easier for us to shrink back. But folks, our country is calling us back to service today. And my challenge to you today is to renew your commitment to the mission. And I want to remind you that our mission is freedom. Our mission is the restoration of what has made America great throughout the generations. And I'm asking you today to rededicate yourself and be willing to cross the Delaware one more time. Thomas Paine said that these are the times that will try men's souls. He said that during a time when the patriots were fighting for the very existence of this country. They were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting for their farms, their family, for everything that they believed in. And you know what's amazing? They didn't know what the outcome would be. What if they won? What were they going to win? You see, they didn't have the America that we have today. What if they lost? What are they truly going to lose? They didn't really know. But those men were engaged in protecting and promoting freedom. Well, I believe that today everyone in this room realizes that these two are trying times in which we live. We have problems today. The stock markets, the ups and downs, business uncertainty, the highest unemployment in 27 or 8 years. The bailouts, the stimulus schemes. All of these things are problems that every single American are facing today. But I wonder if most Americans realize that what I just described are just symptoms of something much greater. Those are just the symptoms of problems that are deep-rooted in America today. What's the problem? Folks, we're stuck on the other side of the Delaware today. We've been left out in the cold. We, the people, have been left on the other side. And oftentimes we feel discouraged, and we wonder, can we make a difference? We've allowed the politicians in Washington, D.C. to trample on the rights and the sovereignty of our states. And I'm asking you again today, are you going to be willing to cross the Delaware and face the enemy? It's the only thing, folks, that's going to save the direction that our country is going in. For the last 234 years, each generation has protected our freedom. Each generation has secured the blessings of liberty and passed them down to the next. But this generation in which we're living today, we have settled for corruption from our politicians. We've settled for reckless behavior and ignorance from those who serve us. I want to let you know today that America's hope is not in Barack Obama. America's hope and America's future lies within the 50 sovereign states, not in the foolishness of Washington, D.C. I believe that when governors around this nation begin to realize their responsibility, when they begin to understand what their authority is to protect the citizens of their states, to stand with the people and guard against an overreaching and an overbearing and an even tyrannical federal government, when our governors and our attorney generals around this nation get a clear vision of that, folks, we will have an opportunity to solve America's problems. See if this sounds familiar to you. It's been said that money dominates all aspects of life. Elections were held and decided by vast campaign contributions. Elected officials and senators were controlled by vested interest groups. Corporate and personal greed has reached shocking levels. Despite immense wealth, the Senate was unable to develop economic policies to prevent financial crisis. Despite military might, the Senate proved unable to deal with rogue states on its borders, to protect the citizens against terrorism at home. And ordinary citizens feel powerless to effect change in their political system. Sounds like America, doesn't it? But you know what? That wasn't written about America. That was written about Rome just before the fall of the great Roman Empire. And as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, it's bound to repeat itself. Well, rather than repeat our failures time and time and time again, I've got a better idea. Let's ensure our success. Let's secure the blessings of liberty that was handed to us. Folks, it's our turn. It is our time to pass freedom down. I can tell you, after serving the last 8 years in the Oklahoma State Senate, a remarkable experience, one I'll never forget. But I can tell you the battle lines have been drawn between the